Rob here at eTrailer.com, and today you're going to be taking a look at the Timbren rear suspension enhancement system on our 2005 GMC Sierra. Now, a big reason why you might want a suspension enhancement system on your Sierra is because if you tow a trailer a lot, you'll notice that the back end starts to squat down. Well, not only is that putting a lot of stress and strain on the rear suspension, but it's also affecting the front. With the back end going down, the front end is going to get stretched upward, which means we're going to have less contact on our tires, which means our braking and steering is going to be diminished, not to mention that our headlights are going to be pointing up, so it will potentially be blinding people when we're driving down the road. All of those things really make for an uncomfortable, unsafe ride. Well, our Timbrens are going to provide us that support so the back end doesn't slam down as much and the front end doesn't come up, so that way we can safely and securely get our trailer down the road. So here's what our Timbrens look like once we have them installed. They're going to replace our factory joust stops and mount in between our vehicle's frame and the axle. So that whenever we have a load in the back end of the suspension is going to start to travel down, and our spring is going to make contact with the axle and provide us the support we need when we have that extra load in the back. Not only did we need our Timbrens so that we could tow a trailer and not have to worry about the sag in the back end, but on our Sierra, the factory joust stop actually fell apart. The bracket was still attached to the frame, however, the actual spring itself completely came out of the socket. But you can see here, if I hold it up against my Timbren, you can see quite how much bigger the Timbren is. And that's because your factory joust stop really is just there to prevent the truck from bottoming out. Because by the time that our joust stop reaches the axle, there's so much travel there that the back end's almost already on the ground anyway. But our Timbrens not only are going to prevent us from bottoming out, but they're also going to provide us support, because the more weight we put on them, the stiffer they're going to become. But at the same time, when we're unloaded or have a light load in the back, they're going to engage a lot more softer, and since they're rubber, they're going to absorb a lot of those road shocks and bumps, so we'll have a nice smooth ride. Now we're going to have a Timbren spring on each side of our axle. These are going to work independently, so if we take an evasive maneuver, turn really hard, it's going to reduce the body roll because this isn't going to allow the axle to come down that far. But at the same time, it's also going to help with those off-center loads, making sure we're not putting too much strain on the rear suspension on one side. Now, compared to a lot of other suspension upgrades, our Timbrens are going to be extremely easy to install. And one of the best things is once they're in, we can forget about them. They're completely maintenance-free, unlike airbags where we're going to have to monitor the pressure, run air lines, potentially wire in a compressor. It's just a lot of maintenance and upkeep on them. With our Timbrens, we can put them in and just enjoy our Sierra. Our Timbrens are going to provide us with 6,000 pounds of load leveling support. Keep in mind that's not going to increase how much your truck can tow. It's just there to help give us the support we need and a nice comfortable ride. So you do want to double check your Sierra's owner's manual and never exceed the manufacturer's recommended weight. And one of my favorite things about these Timbrens is how easy they are to install. It's going to come with all the necessary hardware, brackets, and the springs. And in fact, let's go ahead and do one side together. To begin our installation, we want to come underneath the back of our Sierra and we want to come to the rear axle. And we're going to look right above our rear axle and we're going to find our factory joust stop. Now in ours actually broke off completely, but we still have the bracket that we need to remove from the bottom of the frame. Yours most likely is going to look like this with the joust stop still attached. Now on top of the frame on the inside here, we're going to have two nuts that are holding this bracket in place. We're going to grab a 15mm socket and we're going to pull those two nuts off. I do suggest using some penetrating oil and letting your nuts soak. That way they're a little bit easier to come off and we don't have to worry about them breaking. We're going to pull the entire bracket down and we can get rid of the hardware and the bracket because we're not going to reinstall these. With our factory joust stop removed, we want to grab the short 3/8 bolts out of our kit and we're going to drop them down right where the studs were coming through for our factory joust stop. Next, we're going to grab the upper bracket for our kit. Now, you may have a sticker on there labeling which one's going to be the left front. However, in our application, because of the way the bracket is shaped, and the extra suspension components we have, we're going to have to be installing it a little bit differently. But this front tab here, that needs to be pointing towards the front of the truck, and the slotted section should be going towards the back. Normally, this would be the left-hand bracket, but again, it'll bring this section too close to our other suspension parts, so we're going to be hanging it this way. What I like to do to help me so I don't have to worry about holding the bracket and getting hardware in place is I'm going to take a flat washer along with a lock nut, and I'm very loosely going to install it on this rear bolt. Just a couple threads to get it started. We can take our upper bracket, we'll slide the slotted section over the bolt, line up the forward bolt, and then we're going to use that same combination of flat washer and lock washer just to loosely get it secure. We only need a couple threads right now just to make sure the bracket's not going to fall down. I'm going to come back with a 9/16 socket and wrench, and I'm going to tighten up all the hardware holding the bracket to the frame. At this point, we want to grab our spring and the spacer block. Now, our truck has a slight lift on it, so we are going to use that spacer block to take up the gap here. But if you have a factory ride height truck, or if you put them in and you have about an inch and a half a gap between the bottom of the spring and the axle right here, that's about where you want it. But we have ours lifted and the axle's hanging down right now. We are going to be using our spacer block, so we want to grab the long bolt out of our kit. If you're not going to be using it, there is a shorter one, and the shoulder on the bolt's just a little bit shorter. But if we look at the bottom of our spring, you'll notice there's a very large washer inside. We need to make sure our bolt goes through that washer, and then we want to push it all the way up to the top so it goes through the top of the spring and the spacer. It can be a little bit tough using your hand, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a socket, 9/16. I'm going to pass it through with an extension until I can get my bolt to come through the top of my spring. And then I'm going to slide my spacer right on top. And we can take the whole assembly. We'll make sure the bolt lines up with the hole that's at the bottom of the bracket. We want to just get it loosely started, make sure it's not cross-threading. So the spring will hold itself up there. And then we can grab a ratchet and finish tightening up the bolt. And whenever you tighten up your spring, make sure it's nice and snug and that it's not going to rotate on the bracket itself. Now that we have this side on, we're going to repeat that entire process over on the other side of our truck. But again, I'm Rob here at eTrailer.com, and that'll finish up your look at the Timbren rear suspension enhancement system on our 2005 GMC Sierra.